Welcome to this edition of Thought to Action presented by the Herb London Center for Policy Research. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, the president of the London Center. And if you like our content, please hit that like button, share, subscribe. Be sure you send this off to your friends. Your sharing our content with others always helps us build more content. And if you enjoy this presentation, be sure and join our Patreon community, the Patreon London Center, where we will provide unique and special content to include participation in our Ask Us Anything review of your questions. So without further ado, we're going to talk today to Scott Shay. Scott is the author of the book, Conspiracy U, a case study. And what Scott talks about in his book is essentially a review of extremist positions relating to the denial of what I consider objective fact that is historically proven. So, Scott, welcome to Thought to Action. Thank you for joining us today to talk about your book.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Tony.
So, Scott, just tell us a little bit about the book, because essentially, as I understand it, you've documented the efforts of both extremes, left and right, to deny what I consider objective fact relating to the Holocaust. So can you tell us a little bit about your book and what your research shows?
Right. So what my book is really about is how conspiracy theories are masquerading as scholarship, fancy universities all over the United States. And these are both far right and far left conspiracy theories. And I show how what's being written about by tenured professors, published by Duke University Press, published by Not So Far From You, published by Stanford University Press, published by esteemed publishers that you should think that they care about facts, are actually warmed over conspiracy theories from the far left Soviet communist Marxist conspiracy theories on the one hand, and on the far right, some of them almost directly come from Mein Kampf and Nazi propaganda, which is remarkable that this is taking place with academics. And I show how someone like a Professor Arthur Butz at Northwestern University writes about the Holocaust almost identically to a Stephen Saleta, who is a far left professor, former academic. And this is astounding because one wouldn't think that conspiracy theories would have so infected academia.
So two follow-up questions to that. First is this profitable for them? Because it seems to me that once you start subsidizing something like this, it tends to take on a life of its own. And you mentioned this is an academic trend. So are people being paid a good amount of money to make this happen on both extremes?
Well, the answer is yes, but it's not just about payment, about people making a speech and getting a check, although there is some of that. It's also about the incentives in academia. For example, I show a number of departments where it would be impossible to be promoted, to probably be accepted as a graduate student, certainly to get tenure, unless you take a standard anti-Zionist line and essentially subscribe to the idea that there's a cabal of Jews conspiring to do all sorts of bad stuff. So people are following the incentives within university. That's not so much so at universities on the right, where it's not the case. The far right has its own ecosystem on the dark web and on the internet, where yes, publications like the Daily Stormer and the like are flourishing, making money, and proliferating, sadly.
So I've studied a great deal of the Nazi system going through the 1930s into World War II. And it's very clear that the propaganda machine of the Nazis was very effective in essentially doing what you're talking about our academic institutions doing here, essentially trying to promote the idea that the Jewish people are super human beings, that they can conspire and establish great, great and whole chapters of history that somehow people come to believe. I'm one of those that believes that the Nazis did everything they were accused of doing. There were concentration camps. So, Scott, how do you attribute this sloppiness regarding academia not being willing to study history to understand, as you point out, some of what the academics are now proposing was established as Nazi propaganda doctrine in the 1930s, and that the 1940s in our World War II actually documented well the atrocities. How do you explain the lack of credible research by these academic institutions who call themselves academic institutions?
Well, so let me actually unpack that a little bit and highlight what you're saying, because you have Professor Arthur Butts at Northwestern, a tenured professor in electrical engineering, who wrote that all of the stuff that the Nazis were accused of really didn't happen. But the Jews were so good at planting documents, at bamboozling, to use his word, not good Germans, that they confessed to committing crimes against humanity. They confessed to being perpetrators, to being witnesses, to being bystanders, to being functionaries. I mean, it's actually ridiculous. But yet, and he bases this off of essentially some minor anomalies that he finds somewhere. I mean, that's one thing that I found that is a commonality to conspiracy theories. So if you find in one set of demographics that the Jews decreased by 6.1 million and another that they decreased by 5.8, suddenly that means to a conspiracy theorist that everything was made up. On the far left, you also have theory. You have people writing books. And I quote one professor of anthropology at Northwestern, who Jessica Winiger, who wrote a book where, in order to actually understand the book, you have to assume the Jews are conspiring. And this is really important to prevent anthropology departments from giving tenure to people who don't hold their compulsory Zionist views. Now, look, if these Jews really were so smart and a cabal that they could do all this, I don't think they'd actually be focusing on anthropology department tenure processes. But you can't actually read the book and understand what's happening unless you make that assumption.
Wow. So according to the book, you and I are engaged in a conspiracy.
Well, basically, here's the problem.
I mean,
anybody who doesn't agree with them must be either naive or not understanding the structural and systemic lies that we've been told.
Yeah.
And it's actually remarkable that one academic that I talked to said that she actually preferred theory to facts, because theories are pure. Theories are good. If you have the right theory, then that'll get you there. Facts, on the other hand, they can be disputed. They're not clear. There's different viewpoints. And it's just remarkable. I grew up in a time, and I use the Northwestern motto, where theories were built on facts. And if you could disprove a theory, that was a good thing. Everybody tried to disprove the theory. I mean, Einstein tried to disprove Newtonian physics, and people to this day are trying to prove that relativity's got problems. So we need something else. Maybe we need we need M theory, or we need string theory, or we need whatever to unify the whatever.
Theory, right.
Whatever the thought is that, and then someone tries to show why string theory isn't, which has never actually been proven. It's just math. But the idea is to attack theories and try to disprove them. A conspiracy theory, and that's what's happening on campus, and that's why I'm so distraught, is a theory that can never be falsified. I mean, take Alex Jones with Sandy Hook. You can never actually falsify what he says if you get on his train, even though what he's saying are falsehoods and lies and despicable ones at that.
Scott, one last question relating to what appears to be the left's use of theory and emotion in absence of fact and provable, relatable history. Is that why we see in many instances now this gaining of momentum of what I call blue anon, where the left will use theories and conspiracies in place of fact if it proves their or supports their narrative? Is that a trend that you see as well based on your research?
So it's interesting you phrased it that way, because I actually go back to Aristotle, who had this thought that the way you convince people is logos, pathos, and why am I forgetting the third one for a moment? Ethos. Thank you. The physics, the economics, the basic facts. And then there's pathos. If you don't believe this, you're a bad person. You don't believe in equality. You don't believe in you're a racist. You're a bad person. And I in the book is that particularly on the left, there's a great deal of resortment to pathos that you have to believe. You don't really have a choice, or you're not a good person. And so people are frozen because they want to be good people. And the energy level, particularly the energy level is high in the far right too, so don't get me wrong. But there's more at university level. If a professor says to you, you're an evil person unless you are combating the occupation or something like that, then it's easier to believe.
No. So, well, Scott, it's a fascinating subject, and I appreciate you coming on to talk about what you've observed and learned. And I'd like to encourage everybody to go out and pick up your book, Scott Shay, Conspiracy, You a Case Study. It's very informative, and I really appreciate the clarity of fact, the way he goes through and pulls apart all of this extreme rhetoric on both sides. So, Scott, thanks for joining us today on Thought to Action.
Tony, thank you.
And thank you all for being part of our Thought to Action presented by the Herb London Center for Policy Research. Please remember to like, share, subscribe to all of our social media outlets, and be sure and join our Patreon so you can provide questions for our Ask Us Anything. It always gets very interesting. And we'll see you again very soon. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, the president of the London Center, and thanks for joining us for this edition.